Muy buenas tardes. Entonces, empezamos la parte ya de la tarde, de la jornada de hoy, en el marco de esta cumbre de la Alianza del Pacífico, esta cumbre empresarial, y nos tocaría abordar el tema del comercio internacional en la Alianza del Pacífico y el mundo, que precisamente aborda la importancia del comercio internacional en el desarrollo de las economías particulares en este mundo cada vez más globalizado. Van a participar de este panel a continuación Edgar Vásquez, Ministro de Comercio Exterior y Turismo del Perú, Han Kuyo, Viceministro de Comercio de la República de Corea, Julia Torreblanca, Vicepresidente de Asuntos Corporativos de la Sociedad Minera Cerro Verde, Chee, Ministro de Estado de Singapur, y nos acompaña para moderar este panel Farnsworth, Vicepresidente Consul of the Americas. Muchísimas gracias a todos por su presencia. Nuevamente recordarles los celulares en silencio para no interferir con las exposiciones y disfrutemos de este panel. Gracias y bienvenidos.
Gracias. Siento, por favor.
Well, thank you very much. Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to the afternoon session of the very successful so far discussion about the Pacific Alliance and the Business Forum. As you can tell, I am speaking in English, and that is going to be the language that we'll be using for the panel discussion for a variety of reasons. But let me apologize in advance, and of course we do have interpretation equipment available for those who may require it. My name is Eric Farnsworth. I am the Vice President and Head of the Washington office of the Council of the Americas, Consejo de las Americas, which is an organization promoting the business and political engagement and environment in the Western Hemisphere, in Latin America, the Caribbean, and also Canada. It is a real privilege to be back in Lima and to have the opportunity to host or to moderate what promises to be a fabulous panel on trade and on the Pacific Alliance and where the Pacific Alliance fits into the global trade agenda. Today we're going to have the opportunity to evaluate the Pacific Alliance, where it is in the current environment, where it's come from, where it may be going. Has it been the success that everybody claims that it is? What more can be done? How can we promote continued integration? And we look forward to having that discussion. We look forward to discussing where the Pacific Alliance fits into the global context. The global trade environment is changing almost by the day or by the tweet. So we are looking for a different understanding of where the Pacific Alliance fits and how we can work together to improve all of our conditions in the global trade framework. We're looking to see how the private sector can work together with governments to address some very important issues, to improve the lives of our citizens, to work together toward a common agenda and a common framework. And we're looking to discuss some issues as well in terms of integration, such as the supply chains that are shifting almost by the day. And as the United States and China, for example, continue along a trade war, what does that mean for supply chains in Asia, supply chains in Latin America, supply chains globally? We're looking to explore some of those issues, trade and services as well. So we're looking forward to a very important conversation this afternoon. And again, it is my privilege to have the opportunity to moderate it. We have four fabulous speakers who are experts in these issues, experts in the field. And you have their biographic information, I believe, available, so I will only introduce them by name. To my immediate right, your left, is the Senior Minister of State for Singapore, Mr. Chee Hong-tat, and it is a privilege to have him all the way from Singapore. Somebody who you know has not traveled quite as far, but nonetheless, to his immediate right, your left, is Edgar Vásquez, who is, of course, the Minister of Trade of Peru. And may I say, Mr. Minister, so far these meetings have been very successful, and Peru as a host has proven yet again to be well up to the task and exceeded expectations again. So congratulations to you and to your entire team. And then we have the Vice Minister of Trade of Korea, Mr. Han Koo-ye. And we are delighted, Mr. Vice Minister, to have you as well here. And then all the way to the far end of the stage is a personal friend of mine, somebody I've gotten to know over the last several years, and I suspect many of you know her as well, Julia Torreblanca, who is the Vice President of Corporate Affairs for the Cerro Verde mine here in Peru. She is truly a force of nature, and so it's going to be very interesting and important to hear Julia's comments this morning. Would you please join me in welcoming all of our panelists to the session this afternoon? So Minister Vásquez, I suppose, as the host, the right of first refusal goes to you in terms of the questions, but perhaps you could frame these issues for us and get us going in the conversation. The Pacific Alliance holds great promise. You've already advanced very far down the path. It's caught the attention of many people worldwide. I wonder if you could just tell us very briefly, where do we stand in the process of integration in the Pacific Alliance, and what are you focusing on right now to continue to build the integration in the Pacific Alliance?
Of course, thank you. Good afternoon to everybody. First of all, let me extend a warm welcome to my colleagues in the panel from Singapur, Korea, and of course, Arequipa. And United States. Of course, a very warm welcome for them and for everybody, Peruvians, and of course, our visitors from the Pacific Alliance and around the world. It's very important to recognize that the Pacific Alliance right now have 8 years. Some ministers share with us as a message. It's as a child of 8 years that is growing faster, strong, and have a very good future. The projections are very positive. We are 4 countries that share values. We are countries that believe in free trade. We are countries that believe in multilateralism. We believe in the global integration. Also, we are strong democracies. And of course, we are participating in an expectating way in the global trade. We are countries that already have more than 250 population people. And also, we are the most dynamic economies in Latin America. Together, we represent around 40% of the GDP of Latin America, represent near to 50% of the exports of Latin America to the world. And of course, we together represent the most dynamic and interesting space in Latin America, recognizing not just for us, recognizing for you and our observers. Right now, we have 55 observers members in the Pacific Alliance. And we are receiving the request of 2 additional countries in order to be observed. That means that since tomorrow we will have 57 observers of the Pacific Alliance. We are negotiating with 4 countries in order to have also associated members. We are negotiating with Australia, New Zealand, Canada, Singapore. Also, we are receiving the request of Ecuador and South Korea in order to start negotiation also in order to receive that qualification. Tomorrow, our 4th president will have an important declaration that introduces all these aspects and, of course, will give more light in order to how we will work together with our current candidates and the 2 new requests from Ecuador and South Korea. During this year of the pro tempore presidency of Peru, we, of course, received this important challenge, taking into account that 2 of our members right now have new governments. But it's important to recognize that all the 4 countries reaffirm our compromise with the Pacific Alliance, with free trade, and with the possibility to strengthen our process in order to project this process, not just in Latin America, also worldwide. In that sense, for us, was very important to maintain this fora as a unique one, and of course, with all the flexibility and dynamism that is necessary. We have reached important goals during this year. The first of one, tomorrow, the President will make public our plan of action in order to work together for the vision of the 2030 of the Pacific Alliance. It's important because we want to have a space in which our countries could be more integrated, more global, more connected, and more civic. That means that we are thinking together in order to construct a fora that continue, the idea is to continue being flexible, dynamic, but introducing the possibility to extend all the benefits of this process for the more part of the population. Not just for our companies, also for all of us, because the idea is to work not just in trade, not just in finance sector, also in the social areas, education, innovation, SMEs, the small and medium enterprises, for which we right now have a clear evaluation from the OECD in terms of what means this important portion of our companies in our countries, and what kind of common strategies we can to introduce in order to work together and strengthen this kind of companies. Also, it's important to recognize that today we have signed 3 important memorandum of understanding with 3 important partners. With the OECD, right now we have a mutual compromise in order to continue the lines of cooperation between the Pacific Alliance and this important fora. With Japan, an important economy in the world, and also member together with 3 of the Pacific Alliance, Peru, Mexico, and Chile, of the TPP-11. Of course, in the case of Peru, we have a strategic and long-term relation with Japan, and now the Pacific Alliance have a document in order to strengthen these lines of cooperation together with this important country. The 3rd memorandum of understanding was signed with the Euro-Asian Commission. This fora that have 5 members: Russia, Belarus, Uzbekistan, Kyrgyzstan, and Armenia. The 4 Pacific Alliance countries have an interesting challenge in that fora because are unexplored in the full portion of the opportunities. And that is why it's very important to enhance the possibility to cooperate together with this important group of countries. That means that Pacific Alliance right now continue with a strong view to maintain our process of integration in a flexible way, trying to introduce all new elements to our work, basically in these social aspects as education, innovation, SMEs, and of course in the business sector with the intention to construct the value-added chains in the region and try to participate in a more efficient way in the global value chains also. That is what I want to share with you.
If we promise not to tell anybody, will you give us an advance look at what you're going to announce tomorrow, or is that, well, maybe not, I don't want to put you on the spot.
We need to wait for the declaration.
You're leaving us in suspense. You know, as you're talking about the expansion plans, which are very exciting, I must say, it does have a certain similarity with other trade groupings. You've already mentioned the TPP, for example. We didn't mention APEC, but that's certainly, there's some similarities there. I wonder, Mr. Minister, is there a discussion within the ministers' level group here in Lima about how some of these groups fit together. In other words, you know, some countries are not parties to all of the arrangements, Pacific Alliance, TPP, APEC, others, and that complicates it a little bit. But I wonder, is there a discussion about bringing some of the countries, you mentioned Ecuador, into Pacific Alliance? Maybe we could also be talking about Colombia into TPP, APEC, that sort of thing. I mean, is there a discussion about those types of issues? And I'm asking to set up the next discussion with Julia from the private sector, because when you have all of these different arrangements, it can be complicated, no? It can be a spaghetti bowl. How are you looking at some of those issues?
Well, that is true. The country has passed through different ways of integration process. For example, in the case of Peru, before our FTA with the United States, we just had the Andean community, a partial agreement with Cuba, and a partial agreement with Mercosur. Right now, we have 19 FTA with 56 countries around the world that cover 90% of our foreign trade. That means that Peru have made a lot of progress in the global integration and, of course, taking advantage of the opportunities. Chile, Mexico also have similar number of FTAs. Colombia, less number, but also is making progress during the last year. And in particular, of course, not all the Pacific Alliance members are part of APEC, not all are part of TPP 11, but we consider that this natural process. As Peru, we will support the initiative of any important partner, strategic partner, as Colombia, in order to be part of this other fora. That doesn't depend on Peru, depends on Colombia, basically. It's important to know that, but of course we will be open to support any kind of initiative. Talking about Ecuador, it's important to recognize the important change in the economic policy in that country. Just 2 or 3 years ago, we had many inconveniences in order to have clean trade with Ecuador. Many barriers, non-tariff barriers, but the current government has changed the situation in a very important way. Now it's easier to trade with Ecuador. They are introducing a lot of efforts in order to resolve their internal problems, but also avoiding protectionism. That is very important. And the most important for us is that we have received the request from Ecuador in order to be associated member. We are revising in a very serious way, of course, with a strategic vision for the Pacific Alliance, that initiative for Ecuador. And tomorrow, our president will have an important announcement.
Well, in that case, we have to make sure that we're watching, because now my curiosity has piqued very much. Mr. Minister, thank you for that. And let's turn to the private sector. You know, the governments create frameworks, but the Pacific Alliance, like any international agreement, really doesn't work effectively unless the private sector fully buys in and fully participates and fully supports what's happening at the government level. Julia, you know this very well. You've been at the forefront of some of these issues. I wonder if you could tell us how you're viewing it from the perspective of a very important sector that you represent, mining, but also look at it from the perspective of, is what's happening helpful to the private sector, and how can we work more closely together, public and private sectors, to make sure this is a smashing success that we're all looking for it to be?
Thank you for the question, Eric, and good afternoon, everybody. As you know, the 4 current members of the Pacific Alliance have a lot of similarities, starting with the one that is my work every day, minerals. The four economies have minerals, are very rich in minerals, and all of them also have the opportunity to work together with the farming sectors of their countries. So exports, market, economies are a day-to-day business for all of us, and a great opportunity for us to work with the public sector as well. So in line to what Edgar was mentioning before, it's a good option for all of us to work in the private sector along with our economies and with the public sector in order to enhance education, technical education that is needed not only for mining companies, but for agro-exportation, and in order to make sure that the value chain is also enhanced and improved in order to provide better services for the markets in general. A couple of examples, when we started expanding the operations of Cerro Verde in Arequipa, Peru, we found the challenge of not having enough people trained to run concentrators. So we developed a training program with TechSoup in Arequipa in order to train people of the community that were interested in working in mining, for them to be able to be operators and maintain the new facilities we were building while we were expanding. And we trained more than 1,000 people, and at the end they were starting to have tests depending on the level of expertise they achieved. And in the first expansion we undertook back in 2004, we ended up with almost 300 people certified to work in mining operations, a new career that was offered in order to enhance this value chain. And at the end, we had almost 170 starting to work with us when we started the operations. We repeated the same example for the last expansion. We had the 5 billion expansion we had back in 2016, and we hired 100 people more that followed the same training process. People that did not have an opportunity before, and that thanks to the work that the private company, in this particular case Cerro Verde, offer the opportunity for them to have free education, to train them in operations of mining, and then were able, the best ones obviously, to come to work with us. When we did the program back in 2004, we hired 170 people the first day. Obviously, we started hiring more, and the people who did not have a position in Cerro Verde were contracted by others, by contractors or suppliers too, because they were certified. We hired at that time only 4% women, because there was not much interest in women to work in mining. The last program we finished back in 2016, we hired 100 people for the new concentrator, but 20% were women. So we are moving aligned with all the sustainable development goals in order to work with our government in order to enhance the participation not only of women and more people to diminish poverty, provide more jobs and more opportunities in general, but also seeking to improve the value chain in the commerce in general. We are also reinforcing the product stewardship, okay, making sure that our products, in the case of Cerro Verde, copper and cathode, copper concentrate and cathodes and moly concentrate follow all the regulations, the certifications, and we meet not only environmental, chemical, and world standards, but make sure that the full chain, starting from the production to the moment we deliver the product, is compliance with all the best standards in the world. So this is a way that we can both private and public sector work together in order to make it contagious for everybody, to be responsible, to be inclusive, and also to try to achieve common goals.
You mentioned a magic word just now, certifications, which is relevant not just to your sector but to everybody's sector. And one of the things we find in international trade is if we can have certifications that are recognized in other economies, it helps immeasurably the private sector, right? Because then you don't have to have a certification in each individual economy. And I wonder how you're finding that process working in the Pacific Alliance context. Is there does the mutual recognition process work pretty well? Are there issues that need to be addressed? I mean, it's where these nuts and bolts issues are really what make trade agreements work, no?
One of the bottlenecks some businesses and some companies always complain about, and we used to be one of the companies complaining about sometimes all the procedures and paperwork to be able to import or export products, obviously is customs, right? So because you need to get so many certifications and comply so many requirements that sometimes could be a little slow. And we found the opportunity to work along with the government, the Peruvian government, in order to certify as, in Spanish is OEA, Authorized Economic Operator. So we are the first mining company that got this certification in order to be able to import easily, okay, complying with all the requirements, and this has meant for us the reduction in time for import in general of almost a third 1/5 of the time that we used to take in order to fill papers and others. Obviously, we had to follow a certification process. We are certified now, and we are working to be certified as responsible and authorized exporter as well. So that's coming soon. But thanks to this certification, we are able to speed the paperwork. I know that for Peru, it's also very important, and we have reciprocity agreements, obviously, with the Pacific Alliance economies. We do have one with Korea also that allows us to do this exchange of products in a faster and safer way. And I know that Singapore has one agreement. We don't have a reciprocity agreement yet, but I suppose that may be contemplated in the future if safety standards are met. So this is an opportunity for all of us to, using certifications also, make sure that the values of commerce are available for all.
Well, and the less time one works on certifications and paperwork, the more productive one can be, and that's good for the economic scenario in every country. So this is real-world stuff, and I'm very glad you highlighted that because I think that's very relevant to one of the main benefits of the Pacific Alliance. And more broadly, as we turn now to Minister Chee, who has a broader view as well, not just Pacific Alliance, but Singapore, of course, has been a real leader in global trade liberalization efforts from your founding, essentially. The whole TPP was, Singapore was one of the original P4 countries. And I can actually name the P4 countries, can you? That worked into the TPP. I imagine many people in the audience can, but Singapore has been there right from the very beginning. And I want to ask you, Mr. Minister, you've heard representative of the Peruvian government from the private sector. What do you see, what does your government see as being the main attraction? I mean, Singapore is far away from Latin America, is far away from the Pacific Alliance, and yet you are negotiating a special connection to the agreement. You obviously have developed a very close working relationship with all four governments. I wonder if you can tell us how you're viewing this and what is the primary driver of connection from the Singapore perspective.
Thank you, Eric. Very good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I'm happy to be here to share with you a little bit more about how Singapore sees the enhancement of the linkages between Asia and Latin America. And we hope that our relationship with the Pacific Alliance can help to build this bridge. Southeast Asia, ASEAN, we have 10 member states, population of about 650 million. Mostly, the countries there mostly are still quite young, growing population, rising middle class. So kind of similar to Latin America, a lot of potential for further growth. And the two regions have some similarities, but also some differences. And that's why I think it's interesting. It's because the differences make it possible for us to have new products, new ideas, and when you combine some of these ideas, that's where innovation can happen. I was in Mexico last year, and one of the companies, Pineda Covalin, they are doing very beautiful design, Mexican design, and I invited them to come to Singapore because they can bring some of their very good techniques in design, in fashion, but use Southeast Asian ideas and heritage, combining what they have and what we have in Southeast Asia to produce new line of design. So they are exploring. I think they see Singapore as a possible place to get started, as a hub, as a launch pad into the Southeast Asian region. We also hope that Singapore can play the role for companies in the Pacific Alliance who are interested in Southeast Asia to use us as a regional headquarters. So if you come to Singapore, the environment is very comfortable, very stable, it's very safe, it's very easy to operate. We have very clear laws, intellectual property protection. It's also very family friendly. So many companies, what they do is they will base their headquarters in Singapore, but really the people there operate in the region. So they will fly from Singapore to the rest of Southeast Asia. They will manage the operations in Southeast Asia out of Singapore. Use Singapore as a regional headquarters, a regional hub. We are also a leading financial center. So it's also easy for people to raise capital, to raise finances. Singapore is also a very cosmopolitan place. So you have talented people, professionals coming from all over the world, from Europe, from Latin America, from Asia. It is a place where we hope ideas, capital, talent can come together and we make things happen. So why is trade important? We are a very small economy. We only have a population of 5.5 million, and not all Singaporeans. If you count Singaporeans, you only have 4 million. The rest are foreign workers. But where we add value is actually for the region as a whole. So if you come to Singapore, it's not because you are targeting only the Singapore market. You are using Singapore as a launchpad to the region. So trade is important for us because without trade, our economy cannot function. We have a very busy seaport, very busy airport. We have good connectivity, but this also relies on trade. We have financial center, but financial center also depends on the free flow of trade and investments. Capital. Singapore's trade is 3.5 times our GDP. So you can imagine why we are so concerned if there's going to be a negative impact on the global trading system. What the Minister mentioned about multilateral, rule-based, open global trading system. I think Peru, Singapore, we share a very strong and we are very aligned in this regard, that we want to uphold such a system. Eric, you mentioned earlier about different FTAs and how they interact with one another. Yes, it is true that when you have different FTAs, you have CPTPP, you have Pacific Alliance, Singapore FTA, we have the European Union, Singapore FTA. We also have bilateral FTAs with China, Japan, Australia, New Zealand, US. It is true that it can be quite complicated and a little bit confusing sometimes for the companies. But I think this is still better than not having trade.
Yes.
When you have barriers, when you have tariffs, when you build walls instead of building links and bridges, I think it's worse. So I would rather have more links, more bridges, more agreements. It's complicated, but we can deal with complication. We can find a way to explain to our companies. We can find a way to raise awareness. We can find a way to simplify the explanation, the communication, so that companies know what can I do to take advantage of the various FTAs. But if we have walls, we have barriers, and if the global system were to break down, I think we are all going to be worse off. Countries, big and small, are all going to be worse off. So one of the key messages that I hope we can achieve with the Pacific Alliance FTA is not just the economic benefit, but also the strategic geopolitical signal that we are sending. That here we have like-minded countries in Singapore, in the associate states, in Pacific Alliance, where we believe that we want to uphold this system. Because we believe this is still a better way of improving the lives of our people, of improving the competitiveness of our economies. Yes, there will be winners and losers in a global economy. Trade will lift the economy as a whole, but some people will benefit more, some people will benefit less. Some people may even lose out, some companies may lose out. So I think it's very important for governments, as we promote trade, to also look at what can we do to address some of the social issues. The two need to go hand in hand. So trade, we need to promote more trade, not less trade. But we know that there will be an impact on society. So what can we do internally to address some of these social concerns? Income inequality, social redistribution, some amount of this is necessary to be able to get the mandate from the people, from the society, to support trade. One last point I will make is this. To deal with income inequality, to deal with poverty, to deal with how to provide more opportunities for society, for future generations, this can better be done if there's growth. Because if you do not have economic growth, you are essentially looking at a zero-sum game. If you want to benefit SMEs, it means that large companies will lose out. If you have zero growth and you have zero-sum game. If you want to benefit the older workers, it means that the younger workers will lose out. So the only way for you to be able to benefit different segments of society, different types of companies, current and future generations, is that you must be able to generate enough growth. So that this is about enlarging the pie for everybody, so that there's more to go around. So I think growth, trade, is still a better way of solving some of these challenges than not having growth and not having trade. Thank you.
That was a fabulous defense of trade, and I concur with everything you said. I think that was magnificent in the multi dimensions that you brought to the table, Minister. And let me just say, as an editorial comment, I hope that the United States actually complicates the trade agenda further by rejoining the TPP, the Trans-Pacific Partnership. That would be something that, from the trade perspective, I think could be very helpful and useful. And I say it tongue-in-cheek in the context of complicating things because it's another agreement, but really that would help consolidate issues, I think, in the Asia-Pacific region. And
certainly, it's the world's largest economy.
Yeah, and certainly something that we hope happens before too long. Let me also concur with everything you said about Singapore. For those of you who have not been to Singapore before, you should go. It is a fabulous economy, as are the other economies represented on this panel, but it is a city-state that works. It really does. Mr. Minister, let me follow up with a sector-specific question to you, and then we'll go to the Vice Minister from Korea. But Singapore has really built itself on trade, as you mentioned, but it's also built itself on services. So many leading companies, etc., financial and intellectual property, all these things, that Singapore has taken a very important leadership role on globally, not just in Asia. And I wonder if you could talk a little bit about the services sector with reference to the Pacific Alliance. I mean, is this an opportunity for services exports? I mean, we think about Pacific Alliance, or let me put it differently. We think about countries in Latin America often as providers of primary products, and oftentimes they are, and very effectively and very appropriately, but we also are looking to go up the value chain in terms of services as well. Talk a little bit about how you're viewing this, what the opportunities might be from a Singapore perspective.
Okay, happy to do so, Eric. I think if you look at the economy, there are several things that you need to do in order to raise the value add and eventually to be able to create well-paying jobs for your workers, for your people. And one of this, of course, would be to look at how you can create economic activities that also have higher value add and jobs that are more productive. And of course, going back to Julia's point, I think training and for the workers is also very, very important because they need to have the skills to be able to take on these higher level jobs. But coming back to the nature of the activities, the economic activities, I think if you only export commodities, it's going to be difficult to achieve that. So one of the things, whether in services or in manufacturing, is to look for where are the places where you can actually do value-added processing and manufacturing. So even if you take food products, you can export raw food products, raw ingredients, or you can actually do food manufacturing, food processing, turning the food into something more valuable. And I think there are a lot of very good quality food products in Latin America, in Peru especially, where it is not just for a source of food, it's also health benefits, superfood, food that what they call functional foods. So in Asia, for example, we have aging population in Japan, I think Korea as well, Singapore, China is also aging. And as people age, but as income rises, they will look for food that is not just tasty, but they will also look for food that has health benefits. So this is one potential area. So you're not just focusing on raw ingredients, which has lower value add, but you are seeing how we can turn this into processed food, manufactured food products, health supplements, which can allow you to build a whole industry around it. Services is the same. Services, whether it's professional services, IT, financial services, all this have potential to actually raise the value add in the economy. But I would argue that services cannot exist in a vacuum because you need to first raise the income. You need to create the demand for the services, whether it's consumer goods, whether it's consumer services, or whether it is for servicing businesses. You need to have the demand, and the demand can come only when there's growth. So I think that the whole thing needs to go as a package. You can't do one and not the other. So raise the value add, raise the productivity of the economy, and I think that will also create the demand for higher value added services. One last point I will make is that for manufacturing and services, I think increasingly we are seeing an overlap. What is manufacturing and what is service?
Exactly.
It's getting, lines are blurred. There are some activities now where in the past we would say it's purely manufacturing, but the nature of manufacturing is also changing. It's no longer pollutive, it's high-tech, and what comes along with the manufacturing is actually it opens up new possibilities for services to go hand in hand. So we are seeing, I think, quite a big change in the economy, the structure of the economy, where manufacturing centers need not be located far away, but can actually be quite close to where people stay. Your industrial parks, your new factories of the future, they are not pollutive, they are not noisy, they need not be located far away in a remote area. They can actually be quite close to where the cities are, where the suburbs are. And that is also, I think, important because people can now live and work in close proximity and still maintain a very pleasant living environment. So these are all opportunities for us to explore, and I think by promoting more interaction, more trade between the different regions, we open up opportunities for Latin American companies to go to Asia, where you can bring your expertise, you can bring your ideas, and the other way is true as well. Companies from Singapore, from Korea, from Japan, from China can also come to Latin America, bring their ideas, bring their expertise, and I think it will make both regions stronger and more prosperous.
Thank you very much. And Mr. Vice Minister, you've been very patient now to listen to your colleagues on the panel, so let's bring you into the conversation as well. You know, Korea is one of the most networked economies in the world. The penetration is just extraordinary in terms of what you all have done with IT and with the knowledge economy. But I want to ask you a similar question to what I just asked Minister Chee, and that is from your perspective, from the Korean perspective, how are you viewing the Pacific Alliance? And I'm doing this intentionally because just like not every country in Latin America is the same, obviously countries in Asia are different as well. And so your perspective on the Pacific Alliance, there are probably some differences and nuances from the Singaporean perspective. So I want to give you the opportunity to talk from the Korean perspective. How are you viewing the Pacific Alliance and the relationship there?
Buenas tardes, mucho gusto. It's always difficult to speak last time because all the good things were mentioned already. And just I want to echo, what everybody said in advance of me. I'd like to congratulate on the government of Peru for organizing this very, wonderful, important event, and also I'd like to congratulate the PA countries for their achievement so far. I think the way Korea and I think the rest of the world view Pacific Alliance is that I think Pacific Alliance has positioned itself very well in the world as a very open and transparent and inclusive trade platform, trade investment platform. The 4 member countries are already very open and in economy-wise, and also democratic society. Korea is also one of the most open and dynamic economies in Asia. In terms of free trade agreement network, we have 57 FTAs. We have 16 FTAs with 57 countries. I think in terms of this, the extensive of FTA network, I think number 1 is Chile, number 2 is Peru, probably number 3 is probably Korea. So why is Korea interested in Pacific Alliance? I think Latin America and Asia have great potential to cooperate each other, especially in this era of ICT, digital economy, and then 4th industrial revolution. All this new technology, bring us much closer than we used to be. I think it took about 24 hours for me to fly here. There is no even direct flight. So I have to go to United States and come down here, or I have to go to Australia and from there to in this region. So I think this sheer distance between Latin America and Asia have been a major barrier to bring these 2 regions closer together. But now we are entering into new era of digital economy. And I think all this technology and environment could give us new opportunity to really create synergy between these 2 regions. So I think that's why Korea is interested in joining Pacific Alliance as an associate member state. I think there was the summit announcement from last year that Pacific Alliance also welcomed Korea as the candidate country for associate member. We didn't start the accession negotiation yet, but we look forward to the starting this accession process very soon. By doing so, I think Korea, which is one of the most open, dynamic economies in Asia, and these Pacific Alliance countries, which are one of the most dynamic and open economies in Latin America, could really connect each other and integrate the private sector in each country into really global value chain. Korea actually is one of the unique countries which have FTAs with 3 largest economies in the world, United States and European Union and China. Also, we have free trade agreement with 3 member countries of Pacific Alliance already, Peru, Chile, and Colombia. And we find some of interesting cases of collaboration between private sectors in Korea and these Pacific Alliance countries. For example, I see some of the companies in Peru and Mexico. They bring these high quality materials or intermediate materials to Korea, which is a sort of a manufacturing hub in East Asia. And then they take that opportunity to enter into new market, for example, China or other countries, fully using this extensive free trade agreement network that Korea has. As I said in the beginning, Korea has FTAs with 57 countries, and in terms of global GDP, it covers about 77% of the world. So by using this extensive network between these far away continents, actually the private sectors can really benefit from this free trade agreement. So I think what we can achieve together through Korea's joining Pacific Alliance is to really identify these potential opportunities of private sector in each countries can make use of this Pacific Alliance and this free trade agreement network that they have already. I also would like to mention that Korea is one of the good example of country which has grown through trade. Probably a few days ago, you might have seen from the news that President Trump visited the demilitarized zone in the Korean Peninsula and then met with the leader of North Korea. If some of you might have visited the Korea and this demilitarized zone, then you will have noticed. But North and South Korea is a very, very good example of how this different economic system and trade can make much difference. About 50, 60 years ago, North Korea was much well off than that of South Korea. But then after that, this North and South Korea took the very, very different path. North Korea chose this communist and then very close economy, whereas South Korea chose very open, this market economy with a democratic institution. So that made all the difference after 50, 60 years later. Then now Korea is the 11th largest economy in the world, and also in terms of trade, I think it's a 7th or 8th largest trading nation in the world. And also, Korea is negotiating a free trade agreement with Mercosur these days. And actually, about 3 years ago, we concluded our FTA with Central America, these five countries of Central America. And I used to take this PA example as a way to really emphasize how trade can make much difference. This Mercosur and then Pacific Alliance, in terms of the size of economy and population, that Mercosur is much bigger. But when we look at the trade volume, trade flow between Korea and the Mercosur and Pacific Alliance, respectively, the trade volume between Korea and Pacific Alliance is about 2.7 times bigger than that of trade between Korea and Mercosur. So I think that really shows that this open trade platform that Pacific Alliance countries have adopted so far really made a big difference in terms of creating new opportunities for private sectors in our countries. So I will stop here and then come back.
Mr. Vice Minister, thank you. And those two examples that you just gave are very powerful. In fact, I lecture from time to time at universities in various places, and I frequently, when I'm asked about the value of trade, I frequently use the example of North and South Korea. I mean, it's a real-time example of, one country that goes to autarky and then the other that goes to openness, and look at the difference. I mean, it's self-evident. But the other issue that you just mentioned in terms of the comparison with Mercosur and the Pacific Alliance, I think is also one that's very compelling. Mr. Minister, you talked about the trade profile of Singapore is 3.5 times the GDP of Singapore. In Brazil, if I'm not wrong, it's only 10%. And there are reasons for that. I mean, it's a huge internal economy, et cetera. But the potential here for trade expansion, to build economies in South America is huge. It's massive. And some of the things, the power of example that we've been hearing about, I think are very compelling in that way. Let me ask you a follow-up question to another thing that you mentioned, though. You talked about the distance between Asia and Latin America, and that's true. There is no quick way to get between the two. It's just a reality. And even if we have supersonic air travel or space shuttle or something, I mean, it's still going to be far away. Economies are coming closer together maybe through being linked and digital and all that. But I wonder, as you're developing plans for cooperation with the Pacific Alliance, you also mentioned global supply chains, global value chains. Are there things to be thinking about where the two economies of Asia and Latin America could really be more integrated despite the physical distance? We talked about services, for example, from Singapore. What are some of the things, potential areas for cooperation between an economy like Korea and economies like the Pacific Alliance that can really help drive some of this cooperation as a practical matter?
Mm-hmm. Thank you for the question. I think it's a very good question. I think this morning in the Pacific Alliance, this meeting, we touched upon this topic of this logistics. I think Korea is one of the example where how we develop this the software, which is based on digital online platform, and then really transform the way small and medium enterprises do their business through this trade. We have extensive FTAs, but one of the complaints that we keep hearing from our company, especially medium and small enterprises, that this red tape and all this difficulty that they have to go through when they try to export and import through this customs procedure and so on. From 1995, Korea began this digitalization of this customs procedure. And then I took this example in the morning, but this shows how it really impacted and significantly impacted the way businesses to trade. For example, in Korea, 260,000 firms are connected through one online network. And in addition to 70 agencies related to export and import. So they can go through all this process without any paperwork. And it's all online digitalization. So what happened was that if you compare 2003 and 2018, 2003, for just small and medium enterprises, when they go through all this customs procedure, it took almost 10 days. But 15 years later, in 2018, it takes just 1.3 days for businesses. So it really helped, it really saved a lot of huge amount of time and money and efforts for those small and medium enterprises to have to pay to do this export and import. So I think Korea is very active, enthusiastic in sharing our experience with many other developing countries in this region as well as in other regions. So in this region, I think we are also working with Peru on some sort of consulting project to introduce this element to Peru. And also we have had work with Ecuador and Dominican Republic and Guatemala, etc. So I think these kind of logistics and digitalization, e-government, those are one of the areas that I can think of as a very promising and potential collaboration.
No, thank you, Vice Minister. Thank you. This is very, very helpful. And our time is beginning to become short, but I do want to have one lightning round of the panelists and ask them all the same question and ask them each to respond in 1 minute or less. Let's see if they can do that. We'll see. But the question that I will ask to each of you is, what would you like to see, not what you predict, but what would you like to see as the next step for the Pacific Alliance? It could be anything, right? It could be a new economy, it could be a different focus on sectors or whatever it is. What would you like to see as the next step? for the Pacific Alliance to take us down this path of further integration, developing economies, supporting like-minded interests, etc., from your own perspective. And what I'd like to do is I'd like to put Julia on the spot by starting first with her and then just working down the panel and ending with Minister Chee. So Julia, what would you like to see as the next step of the Pacific Alliance in 1 minute or less?
I'd like to see our economies to start trading more, okay? Not only as Pacific Alliance members, but also with Asia-Pacific economy as well. That's easy enough.
That's very easy.
And obviously to
Easier
have
said than done.
I can continue then. So private and public sectors to try to work together in order to be sustainable markets for everybody.
Yeah. Very good. Very good. Mr. Vice Minister.
Yeah, I think it's a similar point, but I think Pacific Alliance countries can play a very, very important inspiring role to the rest of the world, especially in this time of protectionism and this rising protectionism around the world. That Pacific Alliance can step up and show to the world that this open trade can succeed and make people prosper. And then I also want to see Pacific Alliance to expand beyond not just this Latin American region, but to Asia and many other regions.
That's a powerful vision. Thank you. Mr. Minister.
Well, for us it's very important to reach a very consolidated area. We are 4 countries now. Of course, as I mentioned before, with 2 of them with new governments. We need to continue consolidating the fora, the union of the countries. That is first. Second, we have construct a vision for 2030, and tomorrow we will share with everybody of the world our plan of action in order to reach that vision in many areas. In the area of trade, we need to increase dramatically the portion of trade between the Pacific Alliance countries, because the export between us is less than 4% in regards of all the export that we are sending to the world. And for that, it's very important to finally construct effectively the value-added chains in the region, in many areas. We have identified the potentialities. For example, in service for the mining sector between Peru and Chile, for metal mechanic, for the industries between Peru and Colombia, in the automobile sector between Peru and Mexico, and also between Mexico and Colombia and Chile and etc. We need to construct these regional value-added chains in order to be stronger and also project our region to the world, and especially to the Asia-Pacific region.
Very good. Thank you. The final word to you, Mr. Minister.
Thank you. While I see the free trade agreement as a way to facilitate more interaction and to build up greater interdependence between Asia and Latin America. But for this to happen, I think we need to translate potential into reality. And this has to be done at 3 levels. At the government level, between governments, at the business level, businesses and businesses, and ultimately, people to people. I think if we can enhance the interactions, the collaboration, the interdependence at these 3 levels, government, business, people, I think it will help us to create more opportunities. It will help us to create more abundance. It will help us to create more prosperity.
I think that's absolutely right. And as we close this session, let me just add a couple words. One is that the potential of the Pacific Alliance, I think, is massive. And Mr. Minister, what you were just talking about in terms of, even among the 4 parties to the agreement, you're only trading at 4%. It's extraordinary. It's extraordinarily low. So the upside here is massive, and I think you know, what we're hearing from each one of you is that that's a very exciting prospect, not just within the alliance itself, but with other countries and other parties as well. And I think the power of example, Mr. Vice Minister, you were talking about globally, where other countries, including perhaps my own, are going toward a more protectionist or more mercantilist model. The idea of openness continuing to be a driver of growth and global wealth creation is a very important message to be delivering during this time, and I'm very pleased that you raised that point as well. Julia, of course, the importance of the private sector here in making this happen. But I would say, and this is my editorial comment, that in order for this to be sustainable, we really have to have the benefits of trade not just be up here, but somehow they have to come down to the people, and they have to be seen and felt by the people, so that we can say, my life is being improved by trade. Not, you know, I'm losing my job in something that we hear in other places, but the idea that people are benefiting tangibly from trade is an important thing that we all believe in, but our populations have to see it and feel it. And I think that's the political aspect of what we've been talking about from an economic perspective. This has been a very exciting panel from my perspective. I've enjoyed it. I've learned a lot. I trust all of you have also learned a lot. I would love to continue the conversation, but regrettably we are out of time. And the one role that the moderator has to do more than anything else is to get the panel off the stage in advance of the next panel, so I will endeavor to do that. But I would ask one more final item of business, and that's to please join me in thanking the panelists for their terrific comments this afternoon. Congratulations. Yeah.
Thank you.
And congratulations to the government of Peru for a fabulous session.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
We are aligned.
Yes.